Where the disease is centered in my brain, I couldn't put together two cohesive thoughts. It was overwhelming. Not wanting to wake up, as you said, that's where I was on a daily basis. Simple question, simple tactic, if you will, that might lead to that willingness.
30 years.
Yeah, that willingness that you're looking for, right?
Exactly.
What are you willing to do? You can't keep it unless you give it away. What the hell does that mean, man? You guys are blowing my mind with all of these little sayings. No, unless you pass it along to the next guy, you're not going to be able to maintain your sobriety. It's really powerful.
Welcome to the Y Intervention Podcast. I am your host, Christopher Doyle, today joined by Joe Courtney. Joe is a family man, a husband, a father of four, and a sober man, a sober guy. One of my favorite people, one of the first people that I ever met, really, when I first walked in the door, marked help. He was on the other side. And how's it going, Joe?
Chris, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on this evening. Yeah, you're doing yeoman's work, and I'm just humbled by the fact that you asked me to join you tonight in conversation.
Well, thanks for being here. Yeah, what I definitely want to start with is how, I know that you know the story, and anybody that's been listening before has certainly heard me tell the story about how my mother, saw me walking in on a Sunday morning with my head hanging low, and she just, could read it all over my face that something has gone on, something happened the night before. And she took this as the opportunity to say, Chris, would you be willing to go to a meeting with me? And I said, okay. And without my mother, that very simple, subtle, seemingly insignificant, question that particular day, there's no way that I end up at a, recovery meeting later on, right? It's not like I just would have walked in all by myself when I did. And so she took me to, my first meeting. And when I got there, I don't remember anything that anybody said during the meeting, but what I recall was being welcomed and feeling a part of, feeling like this was the right place for me, And you were a basketball coach of mine previously. And so you were one of the first faces that greeted me that was familiar, not only from, what we were doing there, but also just being a community member and somebody that had a relationship outside of there. And you said to me, here, sit here. You took out a seat. You said, sit here. We've been saving this for you. And I was 17 years old. And, even that, I'm in high school, at the time when I got sober. And it's cool. It's like, you sit at my table. You're going to sit here at my table, that immediately a part of and feeling included. And, and that's just, so special. And that's been the kind of guy that you are in my eyes, that you've been that for so many people now for 30 years. And that's really just, incredible. So, you could say whatever you'd like after that. You could sum up, what's a couple of sentences of what the last 30 years has been like for you?
Good stuff. Yeah. I've often said that phrase to blindly newcomers, first time, who I've had a relationship with, as you said, outside of recovery. And hey, we've been saving this seat for you. And again, anything I say here tonight is something that I've learned from the elder statesmen that preceded me and those, newcomers that have come in behind me. That was an old line from one of the old timers when they saw me, and sit here, sit in our circle, sit in our group. And the impact that you said that you felt that night or that afternoon when you were welcomed, I felt and I continue to feel day in and day out within the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I made a meeting on Friday night in Long Island and Williston Park. I had never been there before. I struggled to find where the room was. I looked on the app. It's between the church and the rectory. There was a Friday night service going on, so there was a lot of, people walking around, and I kind of, being the ego-driven alcoholic in recovery that I am, I want to find this place myself. I don't want to ask for help. My instinctive reaction is to not ask somebody. But I struggled to find my way, and, I had to ask a couple who was coming out like a side door. I said, would you happen to know where the AA meeting is? And they said, no. I said, okay, do you know where the rectory is? I kind of know that it's between the church and the rectory based on the information that I have. She goes, the rectory, the wife took the lead. The rectory is the white building. I didn't see a white building. I saw a brick building. Anyway, I continued to explore. But I found that triangle, Chris. I found that circle and that triangle that is the emblem of A, and I knew I was home. I went downstairs. I was 2 minutes late at this point, so I didn't have the pleasantries of the pre-meeting, but I felt at home. I was welcome. The man that I sat next to was an older man, and he looked at me and smiled. And he didn't know that I was coming in day one, or if I had as long-term sobriety as I do today as a result of AA. But I sat in that meeting. I felt home. I felt welcomed. It was the first time that I was there. And the first man who shared about losing his wife to cancer less than 24 hours prior. So at 5:45 on Thursday night, this was a 6 o'clock meeting, so it's just about over 24 hours, his wife said his final goodbye. And the power of that meeting, the power of this man and the example that he was showing, not only me, but to his fellow group members, that he was in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting speaking about the loss of his dear wife of over 50 years, because this is where he knew that he could get the support. And that's what brings me back, the heroic shares that I hear on a daily basis, the examples that are led by men and women who, again, heroically show up and share from the heart and honestly. And that's what I've always witnessed, been kind of granted in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's why I continue to show up in the manner that I do today, to hear those stories, to identify with those stories, and to see the power that goes on within the four walls of an AA meeting.
Yeah, I think that's really profound and just kind of settles a debate that some families may have and some people may have as far as, why do you keep going after 30 years? That's why. I'm not going because I have a real problem with not drinking today. That obsession to drink has been removed, and it's been removed a long time ago as a result of doing what I do here on a daily basis as part of just the routine and the disciplines that you practice. But you go for that, and you go to be a part of that, and you go to experience that and have that be in your toolkit when you need it, because who knows when it's going to be your turn in the barrel, kind of thing.
Absolutely. To see this man, as I said, walk through his pain, his circumstances, his story in real time allows me to kind of, as you said, put that in my toolkit, keep that at the forefront of my brain, and know that when and if, I'm confronted with a life experience of that matter, that I can intuitively follow the footsteps that I saw so heroically demonstrated by this gentleman on a random Friday night where I had never been before, and I was able to go in and bear witness to it. So it was, that's just, that was my second to last meeting ago. I made a meeting on Saturday in Manhattan after driving my son in. I took last night off, and we're here tonight. So I try to go as often as I can in order to experience the miracle factory, if you will, that I've kind of come, almost benign to at times, and then you just get reinvigorated, and you hear a share like that, you see an example like that, and it keeps me coming back. And to your point, sorry, I'll let you get back to taking the mic. I know you like the mic, brother, but you've met your match tonight. Sorry.
We'll see how it goes.
I know you got that mute button queued up. Anyway, with all love and respect, I do get that question. You brought up a great point of why you still go. Why do you need to still go? Do you have to still go? No, I get to go. I want to go. And that wasn't always the case. I had to go early on. It was life or death. Yeah. But today I get to go. And that paradigm shift, that mind shift, that, opportunity to just show up and to feel at home is truly such a gift.
Yeah, that's a great mindset shift. And the other one that my father, told me was, you didn't give up drinking, you got rid of it. Yep. And so, these are these powerful, mindset shifts that we have. And where else are you going to get that kind of depth, that kind of realness on just a random Thursday night as you're traveling about, just, looking for a place to land for a meeting. And of course, it continues to be something that we are going to enjoy and want to be a part of, because you just cannot get that anywhere else. And it really is that powerful. And the reason why I asked you to do this tonight is because I can think of no one better than to launch into this topic that I've been threatening to, have someone attempt to do with me. And I'll get to it. But this is going to be a really important episode for family members. And this is the kind of episode where families are going to use this to communicate with other people, particularly sober people that are in their life. And the sober people that they're going to go to, where they're going to say, can you help me with my son? Or can you help me with my wife, my husband? Can you help me with my father? Can you help me with my mother? They have a drinking problem. They have a drug problem. There's something going on with them, and we don't know what to do. And we know that you're sober, right? And how often, we get calls like that, and people who are in recovery get requests in that kind of way, and they don't necessarily know what to do beyond what their typical kind of wheelhouse, and their comfort level. They're not,
Yep.
What do I say here? What do I do? And for you, Joe, in your 30 years, I can truly, and I mean honestly, I can think of no one who represents a family's first call more than you. You must have received more call Joe than anybody I know that isn't a professional.
And I appreciate that. And that's, again, they say you stay around here long enough, you're gonna, attract some people. And it's, I think, a confluence of factors, right? I come from a big family, so there's a lot of different, relationships. I'm one of 6, as you know. And so there's a lot of people in our community that know our family. There's a lot of people in our community that know I'm sober over the 30 years that I've been, maintained that sobriety. So,
yeah. And they knew that in your first year.
I would say so. Yeah. No, I wasn't shy about it. I wasn't shy about the fact that I needed help, and, that AA was so valuable to me, and I wasn't out there promoting it, certainly not. But as a result of getting sober, first getting stopped and then getting sober and then staying sober, I re-entered the community. You referenced the coaching. I've been fortunate enough to coach with a dear friend of mine who I know has been on this pod, Johnny Rowe, for, coming up on 25 years, 26 years, I think, in a summer league in the neighborhood. I've coached my son in CYO. I've coached my daughters in CYO. So I'm out there, and they know I'm not out in the bar,
Right.
To contrast where they know me from. They know me from outside the bar. So it's been a gift. And again, it's pretty funny you say, call Joe. My next phone call is call Chris, all right, let's talk to an expert. Let me bounce this off somebody. Because as you know, unilateral decisions are generally self-motivated and you might not think of everything. And, oh man, they're tapping into me again. Let me kind of puff up my ego here. And no, that's not what it's about. There's a life on the end of that, on the other side of that phone that is desperate. And
Right.
It is with complete sincerity and seriousness that I need to have a competent response. And left to my own devices, it's not going to be competent. I need to bounce that off to a couple of guys that I respect, and you are at the forefront of that in terms of how you have kind of not only maintained your sobriety, but also have gone on to this incredible wealth of intervention, awareness, and knowledge.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, I appreciate, what, that sentiment and getting those calls also, but really, it is something, special to have, like, you are, this might sound silly, but like the Paul Revere of recovery, in the sense of not you particularly, but like you as in general. You're the type of personality. If you read the book Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, there's a person who is like the point person in everyone's mind. There is that personality type. There is that person where it's like, this, we have to speak to Joe. And the fact that I'm not that guy, And so without you, there is no getting to what I might have to offer as an additional benefit beyond, whatever is needed in that moment, But oftentimes, you're getting that call and you're able to handle it because it is what it is. It's something that you're very familiar with. But what I wanted to ask is like over these years, and then we'll talk a little bit about the early days for you too, but over
Certainly.
these years, what is when you do get that phone call, what would you say is typically what you're being asked? What are families typically calling you for? What are they typically saying? What's the typical struggle that you see most often where it's like, this is why they called you?
Yeah, there's typically, I think what precedes this is either, a consequence that is physical or a medical consequence or something with the law, that precedes it, right? And then the family, whether it's the spouse and or a child and or a parent, those are generally the three relationships, they need to move past their resources, right? They need to move past that love and however they're handling it in their own personal manner. And they need to kind of start scratching the surface for additional insight and additional ways that might process some sort of change. I was talking to a dear friend of mine today who's sober, celebrated 7 years in March. And again, he's a local. His friends were the one. His wife was his drinking partner. So she wasn't kind of making that phone call. It was his friends that kind of knew the full story, right? So he would, as we know, the alcoholic is very manipulative, and each relationship they kind of bounce around and they're fluid with. And he wasn't doing everything with the wife that he was doing with some of the boys. It was just past 7 or 8 years he had, but it was it was March 16th, and the day before St. Patty's Day. And as you know, I'm Irish, you're Irish. That's a big holiday for us Irish Americans here, to lean into our activities,
Yeah,
if you
the
will.
ancestry.
Yeah, oh, let's go. Ooh, ah, up the raw, singing some rebel songs, etc. But anyway, his buddies called me. They found him at a local establishment. It was about 8:39, and they had kind of circled the wagons, said, and I'm friendly with his boys. They're a couple years younger than me. We got to go. One of them called me. Can we come up to the house? We got so-and-so. And he's willing. That was the first step, right, Chris?
Yeah.
As you know, there's got to be a level of willingness for that active participant, if you will, to kind of get some help and be open to a change or a solution or something else getting stopped, if you will. And so I had like 7 or 8 guys come up to the house. And this guy, he was on an all-dayer, with multiple substances in him. But the fact that he made it to my house, I said, come up here right now. I'm home. I'm alone. No, the rest of my family were at a swim meet. It was a Friday night. And I said, please come up. This is what I want to do. I want to share with him my experience. And that's, to me, what the definition of any 12-step call is from our program is let me share my experience, my strength, and my hope. Just try to find a level of identification with the feelings of that individual in that moment. If I can tell you that every case worked as well as that conversation did that night, this guy was on, his wit's end, and he was receptive, he was willing, he would do anything in that moment to stop the pain. And that was critical, right? So he was ripe, he was ready. So when you ask me what kind of leads into it, I think each case is unique, but there's typically some sort of consequence that the family loved one proceeds or kind of tries to get out in front of or kind of recover or patch up. And or if the individual himself, like this gentleman was that night, has that little monicum of willingness, and with that willingness, we know anything is possible. So,
Yeah. And so we did an episode, a while ago about the difference between a 12-step call and an intervention. So I would point everybody to that as a reference episode too, which is really great. What I'd like this to be is where the family member is going to say, they call up someone they know that's sober and they say, hey, listen, Billy, do you think you can talk to my son? And Billy's going to be like, it's like, well, just listen to this episode, listen to this podcast and see what these guys have to say, right? So that Billy can listen to our takes right now and go, oh, I can see what these guys are saying that's a little bit different from a 12-step. It's different from just me sharing my experience and saying something along the lines of, well, Mary, I don't know if I can really talk to him. I mean, has he said he wants to talk to anybody?
Mm-hmm.
And then Mary's like, well, no, he doesn't even know I'm calling you.
Right.
And then it's like, well, I mean, okay, so then what do you want me to do? I can't, what am I going to do? How am I going to go over there and talk to, what do you want me to say? If he doesn't want it, what am I going to do? And I think that's oftentimes what, people who are in recovery, even people that are sober in recovery with their own family members, right? Like with extended families, with cousins or, nephews or, the brother-in-law, all of those types of relationships. It's like, well, can't you talk to him? It's like, yeah. But what that sober person usually falls to is, I can't talk to him until he wants to talk to me, right? Which is basically the same kind of thing that when I became a counselor, I was told early on as a bit of advice that this is what you're supposed to tell a family. So I have a family member calling me, let's say it's a wife,
Right.
and she's calling about her husband, and she's saying, yeah, my husband is, he's been drinking way too much lately, and so is there anything you can do to help him? I go, yeah, of course. We can get him into rehab. We got an IOP that we can get him into. We can just set him up for counseling, any of these that we got tons of help available. And she goes, oh, okay, great. That's wonderful. And then I say, you just got to get him on the phone with me.
Yeah.
And then she, you can hear the eye roll
Right.
on the other, but with that, it's like, what do you mean? Get him on the phone with you? He's not going to get on the phone with you. He doesn't know I'm calling. He doesn't think he has a problem. He says that he doesn't need any help. Everything we've ever done we've never gotten through to him. And so all of that gets wrapped up. And now here I am being instructed that as if it's a helpful piece of advice for me to tell her, well, yeah, we can help, but just get him on the phone.
Right.
And until then, well, there's nothing we can really do. So how do you get over? Because I know that you've taken those phone calls and you have gotten over that for yourself because you've shown up. And you've shown up repeatedly, regardless of the fact whether a kid or, that husband or that wife or that parent has that modicum of willingness in the early going. They might not.
Yeah.
And so how did you initially get over that, I guess, for yourself? And then, what's your strategy moving into that now when you get that call?
No, great question. And again, I think each case, to answer this, genuinely and honestly, to each case is different. Right. I wish there was a script or a playbook that we can kind of knock out right here and give.
Well, I'm working on it, but
yeah, no, the how-to is going to be put together and hopefully I could, get a footnote in there somehow. But again, for example, and it was with a family member, my cousin who's sober now 16, 17 years, my aunt. So it's just a long story that I'm not going to bore you with, but my aunt was kind of instrumental in me getting 12-step myself, which is wild to me. And my uncle, her husband, passed away. This was in March of 93. And over the course of the 2-day wake and the 1-day funeral, I was 12-stepped by my mother, my aunt's cousin, who was sober 20 plus years in the rooms. He was your mom to me. He was the one suggested to me that you might want to you might want to consider this. You might want to look at your drinking. You might want to look at some of the consequences that you've been in. And so his name is Charlie. He's no longer with us, but he passed the gift along to me. And that's how I see it today. In the moment, in 1993, I was 18 years old in March of 93, close to the age that you were when you came in. And I didn't want to hear anything. I had all the answers, So channeling Charlie is something that I do to this day on these 12-step calls. He was loving. He was kind. He drove me to my first meeting. He gave me a big book and a meeting list at the end of that meeting. He lived out in Belrose. I live in Rockaway, as you know, and said, here's a list of guys that you need to call in order to find a meeting to go to tomorrow night. So those old timers that I was kind of reared by, Jimmy D, your father, these guys, their technique was long before the days of rehabilitation centers weren't common. So they were on the streets. These guys were, they were kind of going door to door, business to business, bringing this message, this gift that they had received, and doing their best to pass it on. So Charlie brought that to me, and that, over the course of those couple of days, and on March 16th of 1993, I attended my first AA meeting in the Belrose group. What I have done since then, when I get those calls of, hey, Joe, can you help? We have this situation. I need you to talk to somebody. That's usually how it's positioned. I need you to talk to somebody. I go prepared, and I show up. The reason why they're calling me is because I know the individual on the other end. There's a couple of phone calls that I get from people who I know who it's their elderly parent that lives in another state or up in Rochester, and I've reached out to you in that case. Mostly our community is so densely populated with active, drinkers, and we know them. So they know me. So there's a level of comfort, I'd say, when receiving that call, and I know the severity of it. And the gift that was so freely given to me in that moment with Charlie, that he passed along the opportunity, 90 meetings in 90 days. Here's a big book. Here's a meeting list. And this is what I come armed with when I have that conversation. Yeah. Are you willing to attend an AA meeting with me? How do I get in the door? It's usually with, kindness and love. That's what I'm leading with, and concern. And most often people will sit down and, bear witness, tolerate me for at least 10, 15 minutes and listen to my spiel. But if I can connect with them, a key ingredient to that, and what Charlie did for me, and he was a character, but we had nothing in common. And he was an older guy, my mom's age. So he was, a few generations older than me. But we always had kind of this relationship over the years leading up into this 12-step event that took place over a couple of days. And that's how I try to present myself. I try to present myself where I can make a connection with the individual, whether it's through basketball, whether it's through the community, whether it's through the church, whether it's through, 129th Street, whether it's through a sibling. Find a common ground, right? And try to level that playing surface. I don't want to come in as the guy who has all the answers. I want to come in as an equal. I want to come in as someone that they can identify with. Hey, this is my experience. And when I've done that and kind of, level set and, just kind of acted authentically, I think people can appreciate that. And again, it's not always a positive outcome, as you know, but we've been able to kind of pass the message along to a few people over the last few decades.
Yeah, I had Jessica Leahy was on my podcast a while back. She wrote the book, The Addiction Inoculation, and she's a New York Times journalist. She said that, that idea of somebody getting sober, like going from active addiction into sobriety, and how, what that looks like is like a 100-piece puzzle. And she's like, and rarely am I going to be piece 100. But if I've contributed in, like, that was piece number 37 or piece number, 46, that all of these pieces come together. And so, yeah, it is important to have that guy show up, regardless of whether it's like, how willing is the person. So this is what I would urge anybody that is sober, that if you're getting that kind of phone call from a family member, to treat it with the, like you mentioned, the earnestness of it. The fact that if you're getting that phone call, it's probably on the heels of who knows how many times they should have made that phone call before, right? That family member is really, at this point, making this call because they have to. But it might not sound that way. It might sound like, hey, Joe, you think that you could just, he's kind of had a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Maybe you can go and talk to him, And it's like, kind of mild, and we don't even want to voice what it is. And we're kind of embarrassed, and we're ashamed of it. We don't want people to know, but at the same time, we think we did. But really, they are way over their heads, and they're finally reaching out to someone. You're the first call. You might be this family's first call, and it's a call that they should have made 7 years ago, right? And so if the first thing that we say, and I'm guilty of it, that's why I'm putting it out there, that I would then say, well, but there's nothing we can do until he's ready, quote unquote, until he wants it, or, until he hits bottom, which is essentially telling that family member, yeah, I can't help you. There's nothing that you can do. And because of my experience with counseling and then going and becoming an interventionist and seeing it, I realized that from the active addiction part and then getting into sobriety, that day one, right? What happened for you in March 16th of 93, right? You getting to day one was not because you wanted it and not because you were ready and not because you hit bottom, because I'm sure that you had a lot of worse nights than whatever it was that happened right before you walked in the door. It's because of the outside, the practical influence of someone that cared about you enough to say, maybe you should take a look at this. And I'd be willing to take you to a meeting. Would you be willing to go to a meeting with me? And then practically, the very practical, took you to the meeting. That's the key, right? It's like that's the final piece of the puzzle is, and it's not something that should be taken for granted because you're sober 30 years. I'm sober 23 years. We both had relapses, but without that first day from that first person who took us to the first meeting, we're not here today.
No, it's incredible to kind of reflect on that. And I don't do it enough. I'm guilty of not doing it enough. But how poignant your statement was of the process that took place. As I look back and, again, this Williston Avenue meeting where I was at on Friday night was down the block from the funeral home that Charlie 12-stepped me.
Wow.
As mind-blowing as that is. My aunt and uncle had 6 kids. He passed away in his driveway of a massive heart attack, left 6 children and my aunt, my Uncle Bernie, and it was right up the block. I drove by the house on Friday night when I was out in Williston Park in Mineola, and I passed the funeral home, and I said, oh, God, thank you, Charlie, who's no longer here, for passing that along. And to your point, again, it was so poignantly said, when the family reaches out, it's not the first time that they thought of reaching out. It takes courage for that family to getting back to what we said earlier of this quote unquote weakness that this family member has. They don't understand the disease concept of alcoholism and drug abuse. And your mother, thankfully, was in your home. She was sober. It takes a sober member who has witnessed and experienced the level of change and transformation by putting down the one thing that they thought was keeping them together, right? So the family member, they're at their wits' end. They're desperate. And they might couch it in, hey, just reaching out, wondering if you could talk to so-and-so, he's having a bad way. I reached out to you, and I'll throw the mic back to you after this. I reached out to you about a week and a half ago, right? I said, somebody from the neighborhood, a friend of my wife's might be calling you. I gave her your name, and I gave her another guy's name who is, trained interventionist, a mutual friend of ours. And she reached out to me on text. It wasn't even a phone call. Hey, sorry to bother you. I said, so, just how they're, she wrote that, right?
Yeah.
To initiate, sorry to bother you. This isn't a bother. This is life or death in reality. Yeah. She called me. They got him into a place. He, Seafield out in Long Island. Day 2, he was detoxing. He was going and he went into respiratory distress. I think I passed it along to you when you asked, hey, how's that girl doing? So, they got him into a place and her brother's in respiratory distress. They buried that 35-year-old on Saturday, Chris. He was intubated in the hospital. He went into respiratory distress. They transported him from the detox to the medical side of the hospital. This is, the severity of this. A 35-year-old young man. She called me on Saturday night from the repass and, upset, but just thankful that I was there to talk to her. And I never spoke to her brother. I never got to that point because she didn't want to orchestrate that. I doubt he's ready to talk to you. He doesn't know I'm talking to you. I said, Jen, it's vital that we get him into a facility. If you're describing it in the manner that you are, he needs medical attention. Again, did I think that he was going to go into respiratory distress? I reached out to you. Have you heard of that? You weren't familiar with it. But we don't know the damage that the substances are doing to the body on the internal side. We,
Right.
as the public, only view the outside and their reactions. We can't,
Yeah.
so this young man, 35 years old, alcoholism, no drug addiction, to my knowledge, just
Jeez.
a drinker, an old school drinker, as they're called. And he's no longer, they buried him on Saturday. So his mom, his two sisters, and, his nieces and nephews said goodbye to him as a result of not interrupting, right? Or giving him a shot earlier. She was saying he's tried detox. We had him in detox. He's tried rehab. To me, you have to continue to try because, like me and Vince, I never know when it's gonna connect. I never know
Right.
when it's gonna resonate. I never know when that seed of willingness is going to present itself in me and through this higher power that I believe in, through this individual that's communicating to me. And in that moment, I might be receptive for change. And so it's,
Yeah, that speaks to, we've our entire podcast is dedicated to everything that goes on around and behind the scenes of attempting to get this person that you love not only into a program, but to then how do you set the conditions so that it makes it that much more likely that an epiphany can take place, that a transformation can happen. And what does that typically look like? It looks like time. It looks like some constraints are going to have to be in place for a long enough period of time for that individual to have an epiphany moment. Because how many people, and we've both seen it over these decades now, right? How many people do we see in meetings for, forget days, weeks, months even, who are complaining about being there, who don't want to be there, who are really just, I don't need to be here. I'm not like you people. I don't have this problem. I don't need help. I don't need this. You people need this. I don't need this. But why are they still in the seat?
right.
Because they have to be for some outside reason.
Yep.
Something is keeping them in the rehab. Something is keeping them continuing to go to the meetings. And it's not the magic yet. It's not that thing that you talked about when we first opened the show here, where it's not that thing that they're just compelled to come because they're receiving so much from it, that they benefit from it, that it's so powerful, it's so profound, that they want to be there. Right now, they don't have a frame of reference for what transformation can be like or how much better life can be because they haven't experienced it yet. So the only real option then that families typically have is, it's going to be some other consequential thing that's going to keep their butt in the seat. Where an intervention comes into play, if you're going to hold like a family intervention, that's where you're not going to wait for the legal system to put them in jeopardy so that they hopefully, that's no guarantee that they then get sober and stay sober, right. But oftentimes it's that kind of outside pressure that does it. So what an intervention does for the family is, how do we pull these levers? How do we use this outside pressure in a loving way? We're not talking about being confrontational or damaging the relationship. It's strengthening, it's improving the relationship. But you have levers to pull. Every family that I've ever worked with has a surprising amount of influence and leverage that they're unaware of, until they have someone like me kind of explain it, And so, but in that family member coming to the sober person, oftentimes I will, at the very least, as a baseline thing, I'm going to say, just if you can shift the dynamic in the environment around your child, typically is what I'm talking about, right?
Yep.
Where if we got a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old that has a problem, it's like, who do you know that's sober? Who can you get? My father had me shoot around with Frank, and Frank was sober. And it's like,
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to practice. Why don't you work on your three-pointer with Frank? You think it was about me shooting threes?
Yeah,
He has me talking to Frank because Frank's sober. And so we're now, and so there's piece number 71. And the priest in my school, who was also sober. He was also the principal, and and then Chris Doyle to the principal's office, and then I go down, and I'm in the principal's office, and he's like, "Hey, Chris, yeah, Cathedral."
Was this? We don't need
Joe.
to.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so there's Joe, and hey, Chris, how's it going? Everybody thinks I'm in trouble going down, and he's just like, "Well, how you doing? How are things?" Yeah, just chatting. And what's he doing? He's 12-stepping, and he's planting seeds, and he's piece number 68. All of these pieces, they matter, right? But for the family member to reach out to you as a sober person, and again, my intention here is hoping that the sober person is going to be listening.
Yep.
From a very practical standpoint, some of the questions, some of the language that I would hope that you would use is something like, what do you think would make the biggest difference for you here? You're talking to this kid. You're talking to someone. You're talking to what do you think would make a difference for you? And after you've done everything you said, Joe, you're connecting, you're kind, you're patient, you're leading with love, right? You're building rapport with them. You don't have any real intention. It's not like you're showing up with that, like the superhero cape is on, like you said.
Right.
You're showing up, and you're showing up just in a spirit of helpfulness. But then to ask a question like, what do you think would make the biggest difference for you here? And what I would lean on as leverage is the fact that, well, your mom called me. So what would you be willing to do to get your mother off your back? And see, that's a tactic that like people wouldn't think like, oh, how many people have we heard say their initial story was, I just showed up to get them off my back.
Right. And they're sober today.
So use it. Use that to your advantage. Don't wait for them to say that they've hit rock bottom and they're desperate for help and please come help me. I'm ready. I'm willing to do anything. No half lengths for me, sir. I'm ready to go. That's not happening, right? What you want to show up and do is say, what would you be willing to do to get mom off your back? I know you said you didn't want to go to rehab, but would you be against going to a meeting with me?
Simple question, simple tactic, if you will, that might lead to that willingness.
30 years.
Yeah, that willingness that you're looking for, right?
Exactly.
What are you willing to do? And again, Charlie and my mother, they were definitely in cahoots. The gentleman who 12-stepped me, first cousins, they knew I was going to be in a captive audience for 3 days. And I've never spoken to my mother about this, but I can guarantee you that behind the scenes, there was some dialogue. He got kicked out of school. He's doing this. He's doing that. The consequences, the arrests, not getting up in the morning, no desire to live, drinking round the clock, partying for days on end, stealing, taking money out of my bed. So I just rattled off 11 or 12 things that my mother could have leaned into Charlie with to say, he's a real alcoholic. This isn't, I know a heavy drinker versus a real alcoholic. My mother thankfully had a working knowledge from, her childhood. My grandfather died sober. And so she was, a child of an alcoholic. And she had a little baseline, thank God. But the families that are kind of flying blind, as this unfortunate case that I spoke to earlier, where maybe it's just in a bad way. Let's wait. The waiting leads to premature death in some cases. And not to be blunt, not to be grave, but the reality is that we've both seen it. Let's give him one more time. Let's wait. He's really not that bad. As you said, maybe this wasn't the worst encounter, but it's waiting. Delay is dangerous, as our reading tells us. And, that's a great point. Just asking that simple question. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to do to get mom off your back? As simple as that. And again, open up the dialogue that, maybe I'll go to a meeting with you. All right. Yeah. Is she going to shut up and stop breaking my chops? And then, all right, tomorrow, give me a call tomorrow. Guess what? There's another meeting tomorrow that we can go to. And that's, once you, as you said, each person's different in terms of their journey, in terms of that time frame that, they need to be present to feel the magic, that miracle factory that we get to witness on a daily basis. And again, there was no white light experience for me. I'm more of the educational variety that it came over time and I just saw it and I learned it and it was undeniable. But that first meeting could be so pivotal. And if you don't get them to that first meeting, then all bets are off. in that moment, right?
Right.
We've both been there where, it's not a one and done deal. I avail myself. You have my number. You're available to call me 24/7. And if I don't pick up right away, I'm going to get back to you responsibly, and I'm going to be open to whatever you ask me to do. So it's a gift that we have, to be sober, the
Right.
gift of sobriety, and to have the opportunity to potentially help the next person who might be suffering, potentially help the next family member who might be reaching out. And that's, that is a gift, but it's been demonstrated and taught to me. It's not something that I just kind of, came up with. This is what's been shown to me of the men and women who have led the way, have blazed the trail for me, your mother, your father. Again, speaking to you, we can both connect on 50 people within a minute's time that have shown us the way. And Frankie C, Frankie Lipstick, as he was called for a little while there when he was peddling lipsticks. That was a J-Row. Frankie Lipstick. But, these are people that were around and they were living sober lives. Did they have a great day every day? I wouldn't know. But they looked great to me when they were engaged with me. And the perception that I felt was, damn, they got something that I want. And if I want what they have, I got to stay away from that first drink, and I got to continue to show up to these meetings. And for me, the power of the meetings, and then the journey starts.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've raised a lot of points that I can go in a lot of directions. We'll see what winds up happening.
I got all night, brother.
Yeah, me too. It's great. Like the idea of they have to want it, right?
Yeah.
When we hear that, really, we sober people, I think, we fall into this trap. I know I did. Again, I'm talking from the experience prior to becoming a counselor and everything, right?
Right.
We fall into this trap where we are operating from a frame of reference that someone in active addiction who has never gotten sober doesn't have. So our experience is what you said. I get to see what they're doing and that it's attractive, that it's something that I want. But the wanting is coming from being there already. I'm already seeing it, but it had nothing to do with wanting it to get through the door the first time. I didn't want to go.
No.
I wasn't ready. And my last night wasn't anywhere near my worst night. It was just a bad night.
Right.
It was an ordinary bad night.
Right.
It was easily recoverable. If my mother doesn't say anything the next morning, I am out that night. No problem. Right?
Yeah.
Not even a second thought. And then the idea of how many times had we woken up saying we're never going to do this again. And then we did. I mean, when you talked about your mother talking to Charlie and then you rattled off 12 different things that any one of those things could have been the reason that Joe would have woken up to the fact that he needed help and maybe I should ask someone for help. I grew up with two sober parents that you've mentioned who were both in recovery for, practically my whole conscious awakened life, and what I mean, like from 4 or 5 years old, when my
4
father
months,
got back
Chris.
into.
You were conscious at 4 months and aware. Come on, you kidding me? You were Doogie Howser. You were the Doogie Howser of AA.
Oh my God.
I mean that with love.
It's the Doogie Howser. All right.
I don't know where that reference came from, but it came.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly felt like I was like like a prodigy or something, and here's the thing, when you get sober and like I was 17 years old, and 17. So then I'm 18 with 1 year sober and I'm Debbie and Jim's son. It's like, being young gets old quick.
Oh yeah.
Novelty wears off. And now you're subject to everybody feeling like you got this. How could you not, and guess what? A relapse was coming because a lot of what goes on, and this maybe, so here's the direction we went, is the problem when family members will often say, he knows he has a problem. Okay. Again, what's the frame of reference for that? Because I was going to meetings for over 3 years and didn't have a real accurate handle on what my problem really was. So I was going to meetings because my life is improved. My life is better. I'm better not drinking. I know I had a drinking problem. I don't want to drink, but I don't have a handle on what the real problem is. I think that I'm keeping me from drinking. I think that I'm in charge of my sobriety here. And a lot of what I was doing then was just, just locking, just setting my jaw in place and sitting through another meeting.
Yep.
And here I am again. And then I'm leaving early and I'm coming later and I'm irritated and frustrated with life and all of the, basically what we call untreated alcoholism.
Right.
If you take alcohol away from an alcoholic and that alcoholic doesn't have anything to provide a sense of ease and comfort, you're just suffering.
Right.
And it becomes an inevitability that I'm going to drink again because it's the only solution I know, right? And so here I was with 3 years and 2 sober parents and 2 points. Number one, it never occurred to me to ask either one of them for help when I was going through it in a serious way. It never occurred to me to ask Joe, for instance, for help or to tell really what was going on. It never occurred to me, even though I was at night saying, God, don't wake me up in the morning. I don't want to do this anymore. And then I'd wake up in the morning, a junior in high school, pissed that I got to get on the bus and I go to school and I got to do this again. I don't want to live anymore. That's at 16, but I don't say anything to my sober parents and what's causing that is my alcohol and substance use. So that's point number one. And then point number two is then I'm in those rooms.
Right.
And I still don't really have a handle on what the problem is. So when you hear your loved one say, I know I got a problem, I got to slow down, I got to cut back, I got it, I'm working on it. They got no clue. They have no idea what's going on. And they desperately need to be connected to some kind of program of recovery. And I think what's important to emphasize here for the sober people that are listening, where if you're that first call, I want to emphasize that we don't necessarily, in some cases, yes, medically speaking, we need to, but in a lot of cases, those meetings are powerful, man. If we can get back to the days where get them in the meeting, we don't have to do full-fledged interventions when this person is 2 decades into the worst alcohol and, cocaine-induced, whatever is going on, or crystal meth or heroin or whatever, it really down the tubes. And then they need 18 months of, supervised treatment of some kind, because it's really powerful to maybe just get somebody their shot by getting them to an AA meeting or an NA meeting or a 12-step group of some kind to start.
No, I love it. And I love it because that was my experience. And that's why I love it. That was your experience. And that's why I love it. We're both products of going to a meeting. And as you said, in those 3 years when you were grinning and bearing it and white knuckling and lockjaw, your experience was you're still in doubt, or you still had this seed of doubt maybe in your mind. And similar to you, as you said earlier, if you do the math and you're listening to this, I came in 93, we're filming in 2025. That's 32 years. So I was sober for a year, celebrated the first year anniversary, active member of a group, the Bell Harbor group, celebrated that year. My aunt was there, my grandmother was there, my parents were there, my siblings were there. I was crying in joy, overwhelmed with emotion at that first year anniversary. It was one of the most powerful nights of my life. A few short months later, I thought that a hit of acid and some non-alcoholic beer at a Grateful Dead show was going to be my elixir, my return, my rebirth. As powerful as that night was in March, by June, a couple of months later, I was in the Meadowlands parking lot before it was MetLife. Yes, I'm not old. Walking around at the pre-Grateful Dead show with my old friends. I had stopped connecting with sober people. I had stopped going to meetings regularly. I had stopped calling my sponsor months prior. And as a result, left to my own devices and my thinking, surrounding myself by people, places, and things that I used to use with, I thought that this was going to be a good night to return. I was too young. I wasn't that bad. Those, doubts that were in my head over those couple of months prior to the relapse had festered to the point where now I'm taking action. Action that evening. And by that night, I was doing my drug of choice, which was cocaine at the time, that evening. It was that quick, Chris, when I talk about it. The return of the relapse and the return, letting the monster out of the cage, letting the genie out of the bottle. The monster was back. And I had no control at that point. Now I'm required to drink again. O'Doul's, going to after hours with a 6-pack and a 12-pack of O'Doul's. And the disease, right, for me, in my experience, it took on a new strength. It took on a new form. There were, the physical, I was young, so the physical kind of, I could always shake that off pretty quickly. The spiritual, as we talk about, that's usually the first one that goes out the window. And then, but the mental component of the disease, what was going on inside my head, where the disease is centered in my brain, I couldn't put together two cohesive thoughts. It was, it was overwhelming, not wanting to wake up, as you said. That's where I was on a daily basis. Take this pain away. I can't stop. I can't get out of it. I can't stop the thinking, the paranoia, the anxiety, the depression, the angles of this mental side of this disease that I had never experienced prior to the relapse came in multiple faces and multiple forms. And it was overwhelming. It was to the point where I wanted out. I didn't want to be here anymore, and so that relapse lasted about 6 months, June to January. And on January 1st, what did I do? After nearly cutting my finger off at a, deli job, after my loved ones are surrounding me again, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife of 24 years, coming up in May, my mom and my dad sitting on the couch, nursing me, nursing the wound, but nursing me as at this point, I'm a 20-year-old. It was December of 94. And I remember distinctly just crying, overwhelmed. The emotion was pouring out of me. I can't stop. I don't know how to stop at this point. The disease had kind of taken full grip of me. I was hopeless. I was powerless. But I knew AA worked the first time. I didn't know if it was going to work for me now. Recommended, you need to call Chris. Chris was my sponsor, and she knew him. She met him at my first anniversary, and he would always pick me up because that's what he did. He brought me to meetings. He would buy me packs of Marlboros and buy me coffee and bring me to the diner and share with me his experience and make me feel a part of and make me, help me learn and work through this process of alcoholism and the complexities of my thoughts. And I called him the next day, and you know what Chris did? He picked up the phone and said, I've been waiting for this call, buddy. So happy that you called me. And that's the love of AA. When I talk about the people of AA, I often just think of Charlie and Chris, the two most pivotal members of my early sobriety. And there are countless others. I'll do a disservice if I try to name them because the list is too long. But Chris, in that moment, on that January 1st of 1995, I called him and he said, Joe, I've been waiting for this call. I'm so happy you called. This is what you need to do. And he gave me direction, which he gave me direction in a loving way. He said, get rid of anything that you got in the house. You got anything left over from last night? Dump it down in the garbage or flush it down the toilet bowl. I said, done. I have nothing left. You know me. I'm not calling you if I got something left. And then he said, take a shower. I want you to shower before I pick you up. I wasn't thinking. I was on the couch for 2 days at this point. I stunk. I smelled. And I knew that I was going to be safe once I heard his voice. And I knew that I was going to be okay. And what he do, Chris? He brought me to a meeting. My journey restarted. And it wasn't the same experience as the first time because each experience is different. But I was on the road back to recovery. And that's all I needed at that point. And I started making meetings consecutively. And then I had a good day 9 months into it. That was my first good day. Months into this journey again. It was towards the beginning of another semester in college. And I was riddled with anxiety, fearful, wore shades, wore a hat down low, didn't want to be seen, didn't want to see anybody, didn't want to engage. You talk about, who I am today. In most parts, I'm outgoing, I'm open. I'll have a conversation with anybody as long as they'll listen. And I had a good day that 9 months into it. But it was a journey. It was, there was some nights that I knew I couldn't go back out drinking. But, those thoughts came and the obsession wasn't lifted again because it was reignited with that relapse. And so, again, the importance of meetings is really what I want to anchor into, the importance of, connecting with people in that meeting, right? How do you get them to their first meeting? You got to be, they got to be willing, yes, but you got to pull that lever, as you said. You got to pull that lever of, you want to get somebody off your back? How about coming to a meeting? It's an hour, 60 minutes. And then usually it's a half hour before, a half hour afterwards, as we know. But, we have that opportunity in that captive audience, so to speak. So,
yeah. And I mean, thinking about like just even what you said there about you going back to meetings, and it took 9 months for you to have a good day. And I had such a similar experience. It's so wild, like when we hear stories and then it's like, oh yeah, that's it, like exactly what happened for me too, like John McCormick was my sponsor, and he's gone now, and he was another legend and a guy that helped, a million people. And, when I got back to one day, which again had nothing to do with me, it was just circumstantial.
Yep. And
I found myself in a meeting, at this point I was 23 years old, and I wasn't there for me. I was there for somebody else. Right. Long story short, I brought someone else. And then I cried real tears at the meeting, and then I call my mom, and I, hadn't said anything. This was at the end of like a 42-day run. And I say, I went to a meeting today. And I'm so happy to hear that, Chris. That's really great. And she might have said, did you speak to John? And okay, yeah, I'll call him. And then, so I called John, and what does John say? Here's what you're going to do. You're going to wake up, you're going to brush your teeth, you're going to get in the shower, you're going to get dressed, you're going to get in the car, you're going to drive to work. Yeah. You're going to go to work, you're going to do 8 hours at work, and then when you leave, you're going to go right to a meeting. Call me after the meeting. I needed direction that 100%. Granular. 100%. And I had no idea if I was going to be sober tomorrow. But that degree of instruction was what I followed. And then, like, I don't think I had a happy thought for, the first year. I mean, a lot of happiness receptors weren't firing in my brain with the stuff that I was doing. I mean, I'm very dopamine depleted at this point, So it took a long time for the scales to tip from it to be completely hopeless and miserable and just, but again, the reason I'm saying all of this is that it felt like I'm hanging on for dear life. I have no idea if I'm going to be sober tomorrow. But that first 4 months, I made a meeting every day. And that single meeting, when you look at it from that perspective, it's like that's what gave me the next day, so to speak. It's like that bought me another day, and that's what's possible. Like really, it doesn't get the kind of credit.
One. It starts with one.
Yeah.
If you don't get to one.
And this is what's critical for family members to get, and it's what's critical for if you happen to be that first phone call. They're not going. They're not going to the first one on their own. They're not making that connection themselves, right? And none of us are going to be so, egotistical and or, full of ourselves to think that if we hadn't gone to the meeting, our first meeting back, the day that we did, that we'd still be alive today. The next time I got drunk or high could have been my last.
1,000%.
So the fact that I got there the day that I did was critically important. And oftentimes, if not all of the times, that's because someone else steps in. Someone else gets involved somehow, some way. And if you're that first phone call, don't have the message be, well, there's nothing I can do until they want it. No. Because here's the reality. They do want it. They've woken up desperate and ready to leave this life repeatedly and making promises to themselves repeatedly that I'm never going to do it again. And then they do it again because of the power of this disease, because they have an addiction. That's the nature of it. Right. And we've lived it. So just the fact that you have that personal experience, Here's the test, and the thing that you've shared and I've shared now, but like for anybody that's listening that is sober, it's like what happened in the 24 to 72 hours before you ended up at your first meeting or in your first rehab or in your first wherever it was. What happened? What was said? Who did something or said something that had they not done it or said it, you would not have ended up in the meeting that day?
Right.
What was the confluence of factors that if you take one piece out, you don't end up getting sober that day. You don't get day one. And when we share our stories, oftentimes we're sharing it from this perspective as if we had a lot more to do with why we got sober than we actually did.
Oh, no, it was a series of events. And again, yeah, I guess I'm guilty of it too, or I'm guilty of it. I'm not saying that you are too, but, so I did this. I didn't do anything. I had to call a grown man who told me to take a shower. I couldn't even put that conscious thought together that, hey, it's been a couple of days. You probably smell. You want to be a little more presentable to this man who is going to take you by the hand and usher you back to the place that has given you hope. And I needed to be told, take a shower. John needed to tell you, brush your teeth. And I want to take credit for this. Oh my God. You know?
Yeah, and I think that we're limited by language, of course, where we go like, so I called the guy. Or, I showed up at the meeting. I got sober that day. So here was the day I hit bottom, right? I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I didn't want to live that way anymore. All of those are factually true, but there are internal experience. But when you look at the externals, it's like, yeah, but what about the other 1,134 times that you were sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that didn't translate that particular day?
Exactly.
And so when we take that for granted, we think that our story should look like this guy saying, okay, I'm ready to go now, when that's not even how you got sober. There was a great YouTube video of Russell Brand. And Russell Brand wrote a book called Recovery, right? Wrote a book on 12-step recovery. Very short video. It's just like how to help someone, get sober, or how to help a family member or something like that. I'll link to it in the show notes so you can watch it. Cool. Very short video, 5 minutes. And he says, well, you can't. Like, there's nothing you can do and then he starts to relay his experience of saying, if I'm talking to someone and I'm talking to them about whether they want to, stay sober, and all I can do is share my experience. All I can do is offer what I have. And if they don't want it, then there's nothing really for me to do. And so you can't do anything. Now, everything he just said is true in the sense of staying sober.
Right.
And is that peer-to-peer experience of, if I can help by sharing my experience and you're going to hear my experience, then of course I'm willing to share it with you. That's how we help each other. But for him to then kind of have the next part where it's like, so there's nothing there's nothing that can be done. Like, you can't help this person, right? The next sentence, he says, I, of course, was intervened in a sort of way because we do this you'll hear it once you're listening for it. And if you really do that exercise about like what happened in that 24 hours before, then you start to look at it from that perspective. And again, this was because I needed to professionally. Right. That because I was counseling and because my primary role working in the employee assistance program for the New York City Fire Department was I was the guy that got put in front of the most amount of guys who didn't want to go to rehab but had to. Right. And so how am I going to make the most out of this one session that I have with this guy to get him over the hump? And what did I usually hear? I don't have a problem. I don't need help. I don't need to be here. This is an overreaction. The cop had it out for me. He knows me. He's from the neighborhood. He's a jerk. All that stuff. Or, yeah, it's a DWI, but it was a .09. It's like just over the limit, .08. I've been far worse on other nights, Meanwhile, so you're admitting to me that you've been drunk driving and far worse, but this particular night is why, I barely even drank, That's what I'm dealing with. And then ultimately to get to a place where the guy's like, I don't need to go to rehab. I'm not going. Right. But there's some piece of leverage that I have. He's not going to rehab because he wants to. He's going because he needs to. Right. He's going because it's not because he's choosing to. It's not because he wants it. He's ready. He didn't hit bottom. Again, this wasn't even his worst drunk driving, right? He just happened to get arrested for it. In this particular session, I listen to him, I build rapport, I connect, I do everything that you said, Joe. But at the end of it, I have leverage. And because I have leverage, that's what gets him to go. And then, Joe, you can confirm this. How many times have you gotten a guy to a meeting or into a rehab or something where everything that they said initially? I don't have a problem.
1,000%.
I don't need help. I don't need this. I don't want this. I'm not going. I'm not doing it.
Right.
If you take me, I'm just going to leave. And you say all that sort of stuff. Okay, fine. But you do it anyway. And then how often have they come home and then said to you, thank you so much, Joe, for getting me to go to rehab. That was the best thing I ever did.
Almost every case, Chris, to answer it, right? So again, as you're talking, it's experiences and incidences have kind of been flooding my mind, countless of just that scenario. I'm not going, I'm not that bad. This isn't my worst one. They're overreacting. I would hear often. If she could look at her own stuff, then we'd really make some moves in our relationship. And I've been, I've had the opportunity to drive guys, to rehabilitation centers on the way up, still saying it. We're on a 3-hour, 4-hour road trip. I'm trying to play a little music, knowing what music type they listen to. Allman Brothers, maybe a little Beach Boys, whatever they're into. I find different genres. They are persistent. I'm not going. Why are you taking me here? We're through Staten Island now. We're through Jersey. We're through multiple states. They're still apprehensive in trying to get a message of hope. Few certain incidences, walking them in to the reception.
Yeah.
You're really gonna make me do this? You're gonna leave me here? I said, if you want to try to beat me home, you can, but you're not coming with me. I made the effort. You got to make the effort. Stay for a day. And that's kind of how I leave it. Stay for a day. You might not have to stay for 28. You might not be as bad as the other guys. They'll have a bed for you for 28 days, but just stay for a day. Give it a shot. Why don't you give yourself a shot? Give yourself a break. Give yourself 24 hours. And this is the dialogue that I've had repetitively. And to your point, on the pickup or when they come back, you've connected with them up there if they have, the opportunity. If they brought your cell phone number in the rehabilitation center with you, they could call you from the payphone, and they call you and say, a week into it, maybe even as early as that, thank you so much. This has been such a great experience for me thus far. Guys are still sober today, 20 years, 20 plus years, teens, single digits. Again, that incident that I spoke to early on about, my buddy who I was speaking to today who got sober in that March. His dad's a little sick, he's old, blah, blah, blah. What can I do to help? You've done enough. You've given me the opportunity to show up for my dad. I didn't do it. I'm just passing on what was so freely given to me. I said, dude, don't give me the credit. I said, we've done it. God has done it. God has influenced this. Everything, as you said, the confluence of factors that has kind of led us to that point of getting to our first meeting, getting to our first treatment, getting to our first exposure, trying to witness that first, sober opportunity. Right. What led to that, and then what continues to lead to that on a daily basis, Chris. It's not just once. That's the gift of AA. We get to have that new day every day.
Right.
We can have that first experience every day if we desire. That meeting that I attended on Friday night, I blown away. Going to meetings for 32 years, witnessing that as a first time. That's why I keep coming back. That's why the magic of AA, as you spoke about, the miracle factory, as I heard recently and I loved, I get to witness this on a daily basis for free. It's incredible.
Yeah, and to witness those transformations happen, to witness those initial, instances of resistance and denial and delusion turn into thank you so much, and this is the best thing that ever happened to me. And then to have the benefit of watching that for 10, 20, 25, 30 years now, to see that over and over. Those are the dividends that being sober pays,
And watching the ripple effect of that individual influence the next guy or be able to help the next guy. And, the ripple, that one little stone of pebble of, hey,
Yeah.
take a ride up to the villa, take a ride up to Marworth, wherever, providing now he gets to come home. Now he or she gets to experience the magic, the recovery process, the journey, and pass that along.
Yeah.
And that's really for me, like when I see the second, third, fourth generations of people that you've kind of helped, see the light, so to speak, and bring them to their first meeting. Now what they're doing, down the road, sponsoring people, grant sponsoring people, and it goes on ad infinitum, if you will. But it's a joy. It's a joy to witness. And again, I'm guilty of kind of being blunted by it and not always seeing it in real time. But that's why this has been such a pleasure to kind of speak to and to you, to talk about these experiences, because it's so powerful. And that powerfulness of just people helping people as they did it back in the day, and people still do it today. But that was taught to me early on. You can't keep it unless you give it away, Joey. You can't keep it unless you give it away. Oh, what the hell does that mean, man? You guys are blowing my mind with all of these little sayings. No, unless you pass it along to the next guy, you're not going to be able to maintain your sobriety. As our 12 step says, it's awesome. It's really powerful.
So I think we've, accomplished the goal here, at least my goal. I hope that if, a family member is going to, what's the word? They're going to reference this episode, or they're going to refer. They're going to say, listen to this, to some sober person that they know, because they are looking for help. And so if you're a sober person listening to this episode, I hope we've done enough to smash a lot of the kind of myths and misconceptions that a lot of us carry around, because I know I did. I know I was skeptical. I know that if, received this episode and you read the Why Intervention podcast and you went, intervention, ugh, I did the same thing. Yep. I didn't know anything about interventions. But again, it was because of being thrust into the professional role that I was in, where it was like, I need to get every leg up here that I can. And that's what led me down this professional path. But then realizing so much. I mean, I didn't realize any of the stuff that I shared with you tonight, Joe. None of this. Right. I wouldn't have said any of this 10 years ago, right? I would have said the exact same thing you hear all the time. Yep. I couldn't live anymore. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I didn't want to keep drinking. I didn't want to keep doing drugs. I hated myself. I hated the way that I was. Yep. And I didn't want to do it anymore. And now I'm sober. And things are a lot better now. And then we talk about all the great things that have happened on the other side of it. And it just leaves out, hey, what about mom? Because if mom doesn't say, would you like to go to a meeting with me today? I don't go. Right. And so I hope we've smashed enough of those misconceptions. And I hope that we've broken it down to what really is this. I think the key takeaway here, right, over this entire conversation is there's a very small, practical, easy step to take in all of these situations. It's not you're trying to change this person's life forever. It's not we're trying to keep him from drinking for the rest of his life. It's, can we get him to a meeting today? Your mom said, call Charlie. Yep. Right? My mom said, have you spoken to John? Yep. It's small. It's these small things. But if you have these tools, right, you can leverage the small. You can take a guy that doesn't want to go to rehab and then, well, listen, let's get your mom off your back and at least let's go to a meeting. Do you know how great that would be? Right? For anybody that's sub 30, to get them one of the puzzle pieces to get them at their first meeting. Yeah. And who knows what can happen from there. So keeping it simple, breaking it down to its smallest parts. Surely, you can get on the phone with this guy, right? You can talk to him. Like the parents can do that. It's very simple, you don't want to go to rehab. I think that would probably be your best move, but why don't you talk to Joe? Yeah, I'll definitely talk to Joe because I don't want to go to rehab. Right. So
you
this
give
is
me an
a
option. You give me an out.
Yeah. So I use this tactic often. I call it, it's in lieu of rehab leverage. Yep. You're using, our preference would be for you to go to rehab. We think that's your best option. That's the highest and best level of care available. What do you think? And then you throw it back to them, and then they're going to give all the reasons why they don't want to do that. You hear all that, And then you're on their side. All right, well, what are we going to do to solve this then? What do you think is the best thing? Right. I mean, you wouldn't be against talking to Joe, right? And then now the reason I'm saying this is because as a sober person listening to this podcast, I'm telling that family to call you. I want you to be that phone call. And when that happens, I'm hoping that you're going to go, geez, it sounds like they're really all over you. Do you think about going to rehab? Oh, you don't want to? Oh, okay. Well, let's get them off your back and let's get to a meeting then. Just do that. And maybe we'll make a dent on the amount of people who actually get help for this addiction, because if you're waiting on them to do it, what we know about addiction is that they're not going to do it on their own.
No, I love it. And it's so simple and specific and directive to those people that are out there listening. It's as simple as that, using that leverage of, all right, you don't want to do this? How about this? And if you do this, I'm sure the heat's going to quiet down a little bit. And that could be the opening. Yep. That very well could be the seed that's planted for this beautiful life that you and I have the benefit of living as a result of doing that first meeting. Somebody getting us in the door that first meeting. And it's awesome. It's, when I look back at it and kind of dig in, again, 30 years is a long time, but I'm right back there in that moment, in that funeral home. I'm right back there on that couch in my parents' house, off that relapse. And that's, that's where I need to keep it. I need to keep it because I don't want to ever be back in those two places. I want to keep what I have, and I want to pass along what has been so freely given to me that I've been able to kind of maintain for an extended period of time. But each day I have to earn it. I can't stay sober on yesterday's meetings. I can't stay sober on what's coming down the pipe in the future. I'll leave with this, and whatever, you'll close in the manner in which you do, and I'll shut up after this. The one day at a time principle, right, that we live by in the 24-hour a day, and I'm sure you've heard me say this. I was a great old timer when I received my 90-day coin the first time. So that was March of 93 that I got sober. So we're talking, middle of summer. I was lifeguarding on the beach. I was going to the Pavilion Group at St. Camillus Tuesdays and Thursday nights, beginners meeting on the stage, smoking available in the small circle. So I was puffing reds, sucking down coffee, young kid, fired up. I get my 90-day coin at that meeting because it was a beginner's meeting. And man, I'm just, I'm blown away. Jimmy H., Mr. Higgs, as I called him, he calls me down. All right, so we got a 90-day coin. Joe C., come down and get your 90-day coin. I come off the stage, big pomp and circumstance. There's close to 100 people in the room, small circles built around. I'm nervous, but I'm excited. Gives me my coin. At the end of the meeting, he comes, finds me immediately. He's putting the stuff away in the cabinet, doing service, probably in his 60s at the point, sober a long time, putting away the slogans, putting away the shades. And he comes over to me and goes, Joey, congratulations. I said, oh, thanks, Mr. Higgs. I said, I never thought I'd get the 90 days. He goes, well, you got it. He goes, what's next? Asking me what my next goal was. And I said, I don't know, 6 months, still well wet behind the ears. He goes, absolutely not, Joe. 91. All we have is today, Joe. He goes, you get 91 tomorrow. And then the next day, if you stay sober, you get 92. That's how you got these first 90. He goes, because if you have 1 foot in yesterday and 1 foot in tomorrow, you're pissing on today. So stay in today, Joey. And Chris, at that moment, I understood what one day at a time meant, and I've tried to live by that principle since. Staying in the moment, listening to people that have come before me, but in that meeting, achieving that goal, me thinking, all right, 6 months, boom, come on, let me get this microwave version. I want it quick, I'm young. Yeah. I'm quicker than these guys. I went to fancy schools. It's all bullshit. 90 days. 91 is the next day. That's your next goal. And from that moment, I bought in, to that one day at a time, and then I continue to buy in as we go. So thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you, Joe. I mean, this was incredible. I think, this is going to be a really helpful episode that we'll reference a lot. The last thing I'll say there is just on that point, from the family perspective, and maybe I hope that we've done a good enough job on that concept, that it is a day at a time, that it is something, it's small steps, it's incremental. It's like, that's what we're driving for, but we're just looking for that initial connection, right? You know, the quote, the opposite of addiction is connection, that kind of idea. But again, your loved one isn't going to make the connection on their own. That being said, you just shared that story, which is something that still resonates today, is a message that you still carry with you 30 days later from Higgs, and you relapsed after that. So what's the point? The point is that it takes every meeting, every message. I relapsed half a dozen times. I don't know if did I hear it when I was the first time around, the fourth time around, the sixth time around? I don't know but all of these messages come together, whatever way it needs to happen, in order to give me a shot at the sobriety that I have now. So it all counts. It all matters. And if you can get this kid, or you get your husband or your wife or your mom or your dad, if you don't have the resources, if you have nothing else available, there is a free 12-step meeting down the street. And if at the very least it's, can we get them through that door? If you can get them through that door, there's a chance. Right. There's a shot. There's something that maybe can happen that would be entirely unexpected and possibly miraculous, because it is the miracle factory down the road. So at least, keep that in your back pocket. And I hope that, everybody finds a lot of usefulness out of this episode, that you share this. And a lot of times people don't know what to Google. So if you've listened to this and you found it helpful, maybe you can share it with someone that you think might be helped by it. Joe, any final parting words? Thank you so much for being here and doing this.
You've said it all. I just really appreciate the platform for this conversation. I know that family members are out there. Again, I'll reference the most recent example, that are kind of hesitant, are kind of, stuck, are kind of without direction, that might wait too long to make that phone call. I just want to encourage anybody who's out there in that position, at those crossroads, make the call, reach out. There's help on the other end of that call. And that help is, again, from a loving place that will share their experiences with your loved one. And, as Chris said so eloquently, that could be the seed, or maybe not, but we'll never know if you don't make that phone call. So that's all I encourage you to do.
Practically speaking, I think one thing we should mention is that if you contact, and we'll link to it, I guess, I'll try to. What you do is, here's what you do. You Google Alcoholics Anonymous, and then you put in your zip code. And it should pull up a list of all of the meetings that are nearby, and possibly the general service office, something called Intergroup, something called, World Services. Something will be there where you can find a number. If you don't know someone that's sober in your community, at the very least, you can call that number. And again, I'm saying this to the family member now. I'm not saying this to a person that's in the throes of it, because they're not calling.
We know that.
Yeah. So from the family member perspective, call that number just to get a contact and say, if my husband is ever willing, would you be willing to take this call? And whoever's on that other end of the line is almost certainly going to say, you're damn sure. I'm definitely going to take the call, right? And then if that day comes when it's possible, and you just go, hey, would you be against speaking with someone? I spoke to someone the other day, or I spoke to someone, or I was connected with someone. I think maybe it would be, I don't know, just check it out. You don't got to commit to anything, but you just talk to him, see what he has to say.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that might change someone's life.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the entree. That's the direction. And again, as simple as John broke it down for you, as Chris broke it down for me, that's the direction that these loved ones need in their time of need. Because again, they don't have the resources. They don't have the experience. They don't have the personal testimony. So just reach out to somebody, make that phone call on your loved one's behalf. It could change, the direction of, and the outcome, not only for that individual, but for everybody involved, which is amazing.
And that's coming from someone who has been, 1,400 people's first phone call. So thank you for everything you've done, Joe.
Piece number 42. That's all I am. Just peace.
No, you've been piece 100 for a lot of folks, Joe. For real. So I appreciate you doing this. Thanks so much, Joe. Love you. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Chris. Love you too. Take care.